Ibu-ibu dan bapak-bapak yang terhormat, ladies and gentlemen, selamat siang dan salam sejahtera bagi kita semua. Good day to you all. Welcome to this plenary session on the challenges and opportunities facing peatlands around the world. My name's Justin Lee. I'm currently the Deputy Head of Mission at the Australian Embassy and I oversee development cooperation for the Embassy. Can I say at the outset that it's a great privilege for the Australian government to be able to support this conference and for myself to be able to moderate this very esteemed panel that we have. Australia, like other members of the international community here in Jakarta, is very committed to working with international partners on better landscape management, including peatlands. We have an environmental governance program here in Indonesia and are globally working through mechanisms such as the Global Forest Observations Initiative, the Forest Carbon Partnership Facility and the Green Climate Fund, amongst others. On today's topic, ladies and gentlemen, on peatlands around the world, peatlands exist in at least 180 countries and cover between 3 to 5% of the total land surface area of the Earth, make up about half of the world's wetlands. 90% of the world's peatlands are actually non-tropical, and Canada has the most. But 10% of them are tropical, and of those, Indonesia has the largest portion of tropical peatlands and mangroves. Other significant areas occur in Peru and the Congo, and it's fantastic today that we have speakers with experience in each of those tropical countries and other experts. Today we want to invite our plenary speakers to really address the conservation challenges facing peatlands. We know, as we've already heard from the speakers earlier today, that they're in high demand for agriculture, that fire is one of the cheapest and most preferred methods of land clearing here in Indonesia, and that if this occurs unabated, the range of issues which we've heard, the environmental issues, the climate change issues, but very importantly, the social and health issues and the impacts on local communities. We'd like to invite our speakers to talk about possible solutions to these challenges, to invite them to share their views on the policies and practices for peatland management and conservation, how we balance those different needs of different stakeholders, especially the people that live on those peatlands. What are some of the alternative livelihoods? What are some of the adapted livelihoods that are suitable on the peatlands? And how the international community and private sector as well can be involved. So, ladies and gentlemen, that brings me to our speakers, who I would like to introduce, and I'd like to invite them to come up to the stage. First, Pak Nazir Fuad, the head of Indonesia's Peatland Restoration Agency. He was appointed to this position in January 2016. Before that, he was Indonesian coordinator for the Climate and Land Use Alliance, and prior to that was Conservation Director of WWF Indonesia. Pak Nazir, please. Silakan, Pak. Next is Ibu Sonia Dewi Santoso, Indonesia Country Coordinator and Leader and Senior Landscape Ecologist of ICRAF. She's an alumni of the Australian National University, which I'm very pleased about, with interests in quantification of ecosystem services and landscape governance. Silakan, Ibu. Dennis Del Castillo is Director of Forest Management and Environmental Service Program at the Peruvian Amazon Research Institute. He has more than 25 years' experience working with local communities on environment and development issues, especially in the Amazon and African countries. Please, Dennis. Monsieur Pierre Tati is the head of the Council of the Ministry of Sustainable Development, Forestry Economics and Environment from the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Please, sir, we're very privileged to have colleagues from the Congo, and And last but by no means least is Gerald Shimilewski, President of the International Peatlands Society. IPS is a non-government, non-profit organisation fostering study on peatlands, mires and peat. Gerald has been recognised for his outstanding work on peatlands over the past 25 years. Please. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to first go directly to our speakers and invite each of them to make opening remarks over 5 minutes. Can I first invite Pak Nazir to address us and to comment on the lessons that we've learned so far on peatland restoration efforts in Indonesia. Pak Nazir, you're welcome to come up here, or you're welcome to speak from the chair as well. Pak Nazir.
Thank you. Good morning. First, of course, thank you for the committee, C4, gathering all of us and inviting me to share our lessons learned or opinion about peatland restorations. Let me start by saying that we all know what happened in 2015, the damaging fires with the haze, and it's very comforting for me as an activist when we learned that the Indonesian government, I guess for the first time, fully realized that peatland fires are the worst, and peatland should not be opened. All remaining peatland have to be conserved, protected, the remaining healthy peatland. So exactly what Pak Taman was saying. That's also exactly what President Jokowi instructed to all the government levels. So, but we have half of our peatland has been degraded and open. We have about 15 million hectares of peatland. About half of them are still intact. We're going to protect that, and half of them has been degraded to many levels. And the challenges for now is for us to not only protect the remaining, but also how to bring the degraded and drained about half of the peatland, make it, some have to be referred back for conservation, but some can be for cultivations. Shifting of the cultivation practices are needed. But the challenge, of course, a lot of that area has been licensed out with very legitimate license. So a transition period and transition scheme on how to put those cultivation area which already have a valid license can work out at the same time the ecological function of peatland can be restored. I'd like to share with you also that in the last 12 months, we are very pleased to learn many local wisdom and practices by communities of farmers in Kalimantan, in Sumatra, that I spend most of the time, whether in this West Kalimantan, Central or East Kalimantan, in Sumatra, in Jambi, Riau, or South Sumatra. Farmers have been using peatlands for cultivations. I agree with what Eddie was saying. I've also seen it in other areas in Sumatra, like in Riau or in South Kalimantan, Southern Kalimantan, where people used the slash and burn in the past, and there was never a problem, even in peatland. But situation changed, ecology has changed because a lot of big canals being opened, not only by government, but also by corporation in the past, and we want to correct that. Number two, I learned that also farmers actively rewetting the peatlands, not only, so there's two ways to rewet the peatlands. One, all the canals which have been built and drained are blocked, so dams are built. I've seen communities with the support of NGO, of course government, also doing that. It's very encouraging to see community have the initiative. I've also experienced with my eyes that communities also actively rewet the peatlands by building, constructing the well, the deep well, and suck the water and rewet the peatlands in their own plantations during the dry months, and it can be pretty effective. In 2015, some of the area of peatland belonged to communities were not burned, while all the neighbors' peatland have been burned. The reason was because they have the deep well and keep rewetting that every day. Of course, the source of water was available. I also learned that from a part of Pak Taman and also other communities in Kalimantan, that started not using fires, no longer slash and burn, maybe we can call it slash and rot. So they still slash and open the shrub in peatland, but instead of burning it, they apply decomposer, and within 3 weeks, all of this foliage above the ground have been degraded and become fertilizers. It's like manure back to the soil. We tested that a few months ago in Central Kalimantan without putting any dolomite or kapur. After 1 month of slashing and putting the decomposer, we saw the pH from 4 raise up to 6, only 1 month, by using this active decomposer. That's also learning from the farmers in the Kalimantan. So there's a lot of local wisdom on how communities have been living in the peatland and practicing cultivations that are suitable with the ecology. Last point I'd like to share with you is that the restoration of the peatland need a very detailed mapping. So science is needed here. In the beginning, I made a very easy assumption. Let me tell you this. The experts told me that if we have to close canals, we need to build the dams in a spot wherever we find 50 centimeters of altitude difference. So you put the dam here, you goes along and measure the topography. Whenever you find a 50 centimeters lower altitude, you build a second dam, and so on and so on. If you go to peatland area, you see it's pretty flat there. Peatland, stretch kilometers and kilometers, is pretty flat. Of course, it's not flat because there's a pit domes and so on. So it's easy to assume that the slope from the peak of the domes, that we can't see it because it's very flat, all the way to the river, the slope is very small, and the slope is quite consistent. I mean, easy to assume that. So if we have a canals stretch, for example, 4 kilometers, and then the altitude between kilometer 4 and kilometer 1 also was 4 centimeters, then if we want to build dams, every centimeter's difference is easy by mathematics. You need to build 8 dams. 4 kilometers, 4 meters of width. 8 dams, and 8 dams multiply evenly every half a kilometer. 1 dam, another half a kilometer, another dam, another half a kilometer, another dam. But once we map it scientifically with laser, that's not the case. There is a stretch that the slope goes very steeply compared with the other slope. I mean, not steep, we can't see it by our eyes because everything was flat. But when you measure it, it's much, much steeper than the other one. It turns out that even in one side, the dams were only 400 meters apart. In another side, it's the same dam was 1.2 kilometers apart, 3 times further away. The mistake could be made easily if we don't do a detailed mapping. So to do effective restorations in rewetting by building dams, detailed mapping has to be done. And that needs science, that needs technology. It's quite expensive, it's quite time-consuming. I'm really looking forward with the scientific community to help us to do a quick mapping, efficient and cheap. Thank you.
Silakan tepuk tangan untuk Pak Nazir. Terima kasih banyak Pak Nazir. Saya kira pasti ada banyak pertanyaan nanti untuk Pak Nazir. Cukup singkat Pak, tetapi nanti pasti ada banyak sekali isu yang peserta ingin tanya Bapak. Tapi mungkin nanti kita akan kembali kepada pertanyaan pada akhirnya. We'll come back to questions later. May I next ask Ibu Sonia to address us. Ibu Sonia, I think we've already heard a lot this morning, including from the previous panel, about adaptive technologies that the local community is taking directly. I think we'd be very interested in hearing from your scientific perspective and from ICRAF's perspective, what are some of the adaptive technologies that you've been working on, some of those innovations, and how they can help to incentivize local communities to adopt such innovations as well. Ibu Sonia.
Thank you very much. Thanks to the organizer, thanks to Global Landscape Forum to be hosting this very prestigious, and I think it's very comprehensive sort of learning forum. Yeah, I think we have seen the communities here, we have seen the policymakers. We are now also seeing some scientists, some researchers, also from private sectors. So I think this is a very good occasion for us to learn together. Yeah. So thanks so much to GLF for organizing this. So basically, in addressing the question given to me, like what are the role of knowledge and research in peatland use decision making, we actually look at the knowledge domain as having three particular components. One is the scientific components or modeling components. The other one we have been hearing this morning about the local knowledge, which is very rich as well. And then the other part is also the policy domain, which is very important. So as you see in the slide, basically the very first component is about the basic fundamental scientific understanding about the ecological function or about the ecological process of how peat emission has happened. And also followed by that is what are actually the drivers. We have been listening a lot from the communities this morning, but also the drivers, the teleconnection between the peatland degradation with the global markets is not yet explicitly said. So basically there's an elephant in the room that perhaps we need to address. Yeah? So the attribution of the peatland degradation, fire, and also emissions should be researched properly. And within that, actually, the social complexity, the interaction between government, private sectors, and local people. And local people here sometimes also include migrants on top of the indigenous community. So this social complexity needs to be understood insofar what sort of policies that are necessary to be there. So the very first component there in the left-hand side is basically the understanding, the scientific and research and knowledge domain. And then in the top of the right-hand side, basically you see the gray box. Basically, this is putting all this knowledge. Then we have the second question: whether are we willing to act? Yeah. And then the next question will be: are we able to act? Yeah. The willingness to act, basically, within this few years, a couple of years. Past in Indonesia, basically, we see that the willingness to act is there. We see that Pak Nasir with the Peatland Restoration Agency is now very much active, very much funded and supported by the government and also by other institutions. So I think the willingness to act is there, and then the commitment for NDC, of which peatland emission reduction is very big part of, is there. So I think willingness to act is quite strong at the moment. It's okay, but. And then also the voluntary and mandatory norms of behavior of private sectors are, we can see in the past 2 years at least that the commitment, the willingness, the pledge that private sectors made about zero fire, zero deforestation is there. So I think the willingness is there. Yeah. But the next question is, are we able to act? Yeah? Within this, we need to put peatland in the wider context. Actually, what is happening in the peatland landscape basically is not completely isolated from a development agenda at the jurisdictional level or the landscape, the livelihood at the broader landscape level. So I think within this, the integrated development planning, yeah, having their local government to be part of discussion, to be involved in the beginning of this peatland management and restoration is very important. And we did hear this morning about the community in East Kalimantan have been working on land use planning. This is very important, yeah, I think. But putting land use planning in a broader context, at the jurisdictional level, at the whole watershed level, will be important as part of the ability to act. Yeah, and within from this actually then the actions can be happening, the action and the action research. What are the options for community and also private sectors, and what are the role of government in terms of pushing or promoting the tropical peatland to be restored, but still be able to support the livelihoods of people that live around that areas. And we did that also. The options of restoration needs to be really understood, whether it's ecological restoration is necessary to be there to get to restore or to recover the peatland into the most pristine natural condition, or whether there are some degraded function that also include the production function that needs to be restored there. So zonation is very necessary there. I'm glad the BRG, Peatland Restoration Agency, has put a lot of emphasis of mapping, of which as well the zonation of the function within the peatland landscape is also very necessary. And within this, I think, just to conclude, within this knowledge domain, there will be a lot of interaction between this scientific knowledge domain, local knowledge domain, and also the policy knowledge domain. And this is not a linear sort of process, but there's a lot of interaction, a lot of looping. And within this, I feel that, we need to do this together. We need to communicate this well. So like, for example, Pak Nasir has been mentioning, we need these particular maps to understand what needs to be done, basically. So the relevance or the salience of the research we are doing is very important. What are actually the policymakers need? What are the local options for restoration need? What sort of information? So the relevance of research is very important. Otherwise, we will just keep writing scientific journal article, but it doesn't go anywhere. So I think, of course, the credibility is important for research. And also another part which I would like to commend the Peatland Restoration Agency on is the legitimacy of the research that has been happening. We know that there's a lot of volume of literature of research on peatland, but I think the subset of what has been produced by the local national scientists or researchers are quite low, quite small, the portion is. But I think BRG now is also working in supporting researchers at the national level as well to contribute a lot to that. So with that, I would like to finish. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sonia. Please tepuk tangan untuk Ibu Sonia. As we've indicated, one of the real purposes of this conference and this session is to share the international experiences. Indonesia, and thank you very much, Pak Nazir and Sonia, has considerable experience and both lessons for the international community, but also we hope that here in Indonesia, Indonesia can learn from some of the lessons that are occurring internationally as well. And so can I next pass to Dennis, and the Amazon as one of the areas with very large tropical peatlands and dealing with many similar issues but different. I think we're very interested in hearing what the situation is in the Amazon, Dennis, and how it is being the same similar issues that are faced here are being addressed there. So very grateful, Dennis, for your insights.
Good morning. Salam alaikum. Thank you very much for the invitation. I would like to share some approach that we are taking into the Peruvian Amazon related to peatlands. I would say peatland are life of the Peruvian Amazon. We are very lucky that we have some plants over there that are well used. I will mention in Spanish we call this aguaje. Aguaje is a palm that grows very well in the peatlands. And people in the Peruvian Amazon, they love it. and it's part of their life. It's part of the economy. So we are lucky that we start keeping that piece of land, that piece of peatlands that we have over there. Even though in the past we have some problems with the oil palm plantations and paddy rice, but we are lucky. I mentioned again that we have that plant that everybody like it. That fruit is fantastic, has the highest amount of vitamin A, more than carrots, and it's part of the economy. So the approach that we are taking in Peru is how to manage those big peatlands over there. We're talking about 5 million of hectares of peatlands. That means economy, that means food, that means wildlife, that means money. So that's the way we're talking about over there. What we are looking for new markets for that fruit. In that way, we believe in Peru is going to help the economy of local people. We are going to preserve those environments. At the same time, we are going to give economy to local people. So we believe that we could be winner and winners, everybody. But also there is something that we learn trying to manage those aguaje plants over there in Peru. We learned that those big peatlands has huge amount of carbon below ground. That helps very much. If we have some numbers, for example, in Peru, we can mention that we have about 10 gigatons of carbon in the forest, the Peruvian forest. 3 years ago, we got some data that only 3% of the Amazonian forest, we have 40% of carbon storage underground. We see there's a huge picture, there's a new opportunity to look for, not just to solve the local problems, but also to do a lot of mitigation in climate change. So there is a huge opportunity that we have over there in Peru. Just a matter, we are looking the way, to tell you frankly, we are not looking for carbon payment. We are looking for how to manage better those peatlands that we have in Peru. In that way, local people is going to help us. They are going to be benefit directly for that management of those peatlands. I believe, at least in Peru, we believe that we could be winners in terms of forest management, biodiversity conservation, and mitigation to climate change. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dennis. And I think we'd really like to come back to some of those issues around how to engage local people for that most effective management of the peatlands. Can I now pass to Monsieur Tati from the Congo? And again, we heard a little bit about the Congo already, that you have peatlands there, but largely unused at the moment, or in their natural state. And very interested in the plans that your government has for managing those in the future, Monsieur Tati.
Merci beaucoup.
Terima kasih.
Alors, moi j'interviens donc au nom de deux pays, donc la République démocratique du Congo.
Saya berbicara atas nama negara saya, Republik Demokratik Kongo.
Et la République du Congo. Et la République du Congo.
Dan Republik Kongo.
Alors, ce sont là deux pays tropicaux.
Ini ada dua negara tropik.
Deux pays d'Afrique.
Dua negara di Afrika.
Et deux pays du bassin du Congo.
Dan dua negara yang berada pada basin Kongo.
Qui travaillent beaucoup depuis plusieurs décennies.
Yang bekerja banyak sejak bertahun-tahun.
Dans le cadre de la contribution à la lutte contre le changement climatique.
Dan untuk berkontribusi terhadap pencegahan perubahan iklim.
Et ces pays ont beaucoup fait en matière de gestion durable de leurs forêts.
Dan negara ini telah banyak berbuat untuk konservasi hutan.
Ils ont pris beaucoup d'engagement au plan international.
Dan banyak sekali mempunyai keterikatan terhadap dunia internasional.
Et aujourd'hui, les actions qui sont mises en œuvre dans ces pays
Dan pada saat ini tindakan-tindakan dilakukan oleh negara ini
montrent que beaucoup d'avancées ont été réalisées dans ce chemin-là.
menunjukkan bahwa banyak realisasi yang sudah terjadi dalam bidang ini.
Mais nous voulons maintenir cette dynamique, nous voulons aller plus loin.
Tapi kami tetap ingin mempertahankan dinamika ini dan ingin berbuat lebih jauh.
C'est pourquoi nous avons beaucoup apprécié l'initiative globale sur les tourbières.
Itulah sebabnya kami banyak mengapresiasi dan menghargai usaha-usaha dari dunia dalam rangka mengkonservasi lahan gambut.
C'est pour cela que nous sommes ici en Indonésie.
Itulah sebabnya maka kami berada di sini di Indonesia.
Alors ici nous avons vu beaucoup de choses.
Dan di sini kami sudah melihat banyak sekali hal.
Nous avons entendu beaucoup de choses.
Kami juga sudah mendengar banyak.
Nous avons des tourbières chez nous, dans les deux pays.
Di kedua negara ini kami mempunyai lahan gambut.
Mais c'est des tourbières qui sont encore vierges.
Tapi lahan gambut kami masih bersifat perawan.
Mais à très court terme, sinon à moyen terme, il est fort possible
Tapi dalam jangka waktu yang tidak terlalu lama ada kemungkinan
qu'il y ait des interventions dans ce genre de milieu si sensible.
akan ada intervensi-intervensi yang dilakukan terhadap lingkungan yang sangat sensitif ini.
Notamment par le biais de l'exploitation minière, l'exploitation pétrolière.
Terutama oleh pihak-pihak yang ingin mengeksploitasi secara pertambangan, misalnya pertambangan dan minyak.
Et peut-être d'autres formes de valorisation, mais qui ne sont pas encore connues aujourd'hui.
Dan bentuk-bentuk eksplorasi lain yang sampai saat ini belum diketahui.
Alors, par rapport à cela,
dan sehubungan dengan itu,
notre présence ici en Indonésie
keberadaan kami di Indonesia
nous permet de voir
memungkinkan kami untuk melihat
quels peuvent être les problèmes qui se poseraient demain lorsque ces tourbières du Congo venaient à être valorisées.
Problem apa sajakah yang mungkin akan kami hadapi di Kongo, karena ini yang sudah dihadapi dunia sekarang ini akan mungkin dihadapi oleh Kongo di masa depan.
Parce que en Indonésie, cela se fait depuis quelque temps.
Karena di Indonesia ini sudah terjadi selama beberapa waktu.
Et étant ici,
dan dengan berada di sini,
nous nous sommes rendus compte
kami menyadari
que le drame, le problème principal, c'est le problème d'incendie.
Bahwa problem yang paling utama adalah terjadinya kebakaran.
Lié au fait que lorsque l'eau n'est pas bien gérée au niveau de tourbières, ça induit des assèchements et qui donc débouche sur des incendies.
Yaitu bahwa ketika air tidak di-manage, tidak dikelola dengan baik, maka pada suatu ketika akan terjadi kekeringan sehingga itu akan menyebabkan kebakaran.
Nous avons compris à quel point ceci constitue un drame pour ce pays.
Dan kami juga memahami bahwa bagaimana problem ini sudah menjadikan suatu drama untuk negara ini.
Nous avons vu dans les films, dans les vidéos.
Kami sudah melihat dalam film, dalam video.
Mais ce matin, c'est encore plus grave.
Tapi yang kami dengar pagi ini lebih parah lagi.
De voir une maman en parler avec autant d'émotion.
Melihat bahwa ada orang yang membicarakan hal itu dengan sedemikian emosi, perasaan yang tertumpah di dalam pembicaranya.
Et nous nous sommes dit, nous ne voulons pas vivre les mêmes choses.
Dan kami mengatakan pada diri kami sendiri, kami tidak ingin mengalami hal yang sama seperti itu.
C'est pourquoi nous pensons.
Begitulah cara pemikiran kami.
Qu'il va falloir sensibiliser nos compatriotes.
Yang akan berpendapat bahwa kami harus memberikan awareness terhadap rekan-rekan kami
sur l'importance
untuk terhadap pentingnya masalah ini.
De gérer durablement ces espaces-là, les tourbières.
yaitu untuk mengelola secara maksimal lahan gambut ini.
Mais nous ne saurons le faire efficacement
Tapi kami hanya bisa melakukannya dengan efektif
sans associer le pays qui a déjà vécu ce genre de choses.
tanpa melibatkan negara yang sudah pernah mengalami hal ini.
Et nous pensons que dans les actions menées dans nos pays respectifs à court ou moyen terme,
Dan kami merencanakan untuk mengikuti ini baik secara jangka waktu pendek maupun jangka waktu menengah
les experts indonésiens,
dari expert atau ahli-ahli dari Indonesia,
et peut-être même Monsieur Taman qui était ici et Madame
Sinta.
Sinta, pourront peut-être apporter leur témoignage.
Mungkin Pak Taman di sini dan Ibu Sinta juga nanti bisa menceritakan pengalamannya.
Nous pensons aussi que la recherche a un grand rôle à jouer là-dedans.
Dan menurut kami riset ini bisa
La recherche a un grand rôle à jouer dans
mempunyai peranan yang sangat penting untuk dimainkan.
parce que pour bien sensibiliser,
Karena untuk bisa membangkitkan awareness yang tinggi,
il faut avoir des données, il faut se référer à des connaissances bien précises.
harus ada referensinya, harus ada catatannya.
Et ça, c'est la recherche qui peut nous les fournir.
Dan itu catatan-catatan itulah yang bisa disediakan oleh riset.
Nous apprécions beaucoup aussi ce que nous avons vu sur le terrain, notamment l'ingéniosité des populations locales dans le cadre de la lutte contre les incendies.
Kami juga banyak menghargai apa yang sudah dilakukan oleh para aktor-aktor lokal dalam rangka menanggulangi kebakaran.
Nous avons vu comment des populations locales essayent de créer des canaux avec des barrages pour réhydrater ou bien irriguer les tourbières.
Dan kami juga menyaksikan gimana para warga setempat itu membangun kanal dan membangun dam untuk membendung air sehingga bisa mengatur pengairan terhadap lahan gambut secara baik.
Nous avons aussi apprécié l'implication des populations autochtones dans le cadre de la restauration de ces tourbières.
Kami juga menyaksikan bagaimana para anggota masyarakat adat dalam memainkan perannya dalam menjaga lingkungan lahan gambut itu.
Et nous avons apprécié le fait qu'on nous ait confié à une séance de plantation d'arbres.
Dan kami juga sangat mengapresiasi bahwa kami bisa menyaksikan pada saat penanaman tanaman dalam rangka menjaga lahan gambut.
Et nous avons eu aussi l'occasion d'apprécier à juste titre l'implication des autorités.
Dan kami juga bisa menyaksikan di sini implikasi atau turut serta peranan pemerintah.
Et nous sommes contents de nous rendre compte qu'en Indonésie, la gestion des tourbières est encadrée par la loi, par la réglementation.
Dan kami juga senang bahwa di Indonesia ini penanganan lahan gambut itu juga didukung oleh adanya peraturan dari pemerintah.
Tout ceci, pour nous, mérite d'être capitalisé dans le cadre de nos pays.
Dan ini
Tout ceci mérite d'être mis à profit à partager dans nos pays, dans le cadre de la gestion des tourbières.
Ya, ini semua layak untuk kami adopsi untuk bisa dibagikan di negara kami nanti.
Mais bien évidemment, pour nos pays en voie de développement qui se cherchent encore,
Dan kami status kami di sini adalah sebuah negara yang sedang dalam pencarian.
nous avons besoin d'être accompagnés
Kami butuh untuk di-assist, didampingi.
par la recherche, c'est vrai,
Tentu saja dari segi riset,
mais aussi par les bailleurs de fonds,
tapi juga dari data-data dari lapangan.
parce que notre engagement à conserver ou à gérer durablement ces espaces
Karena niat kami untuk mengkonservasi lahan-lahan gambut ini
nécessite un appui,
memerlukan dukungan,
notamment au plan financier.
terutama dalam hal finansial.
Pour ne pas décourager cette bonne volonté que nous avons depuis des décennies pour aller de l'avant.
Jadi kami mengharapkan supaya niat kami untuk bergerak di bidang ini tidak terhalang.
Je remercie donc l'Indonésie pour cette opportunité qui nous est offerte
Kami berterima kasih kepada Indonesia untuk terjadinya kesempatan ini
d'avoir vu tout cela.
dan bisa menyaksikan semua ini.
Je vous remercie.
Terima kasih banyak.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Monsieur Tatsi. I think clearly what's coming through in our in the discussions both in this plenary and previously is the strong desire both from the very local level right through to the international level to be sharing experience. Clearly there's a large scientific research need on various aspects, as we've heard, but also quite a strong desire. And that communication from the local level, making sure that those experiences are heard, ensuring that the scientific research that's done is consistent with the situation on the ground, and then having the communication between the different levels and having the communication between the countries is clearly very important and a difficult thing clearly to do with the number of different stakeholders that are involved in this issue. I'd now like to pass to Gerald from the International Peatlands Society, and I'd be interested, Gerald, in clearly your work and your observations of peatlands internationally, but also the role of your organisation in some of those support that it can provide in the area of science, in the area of communication, in experiences with peatlands as well. So please.
Yes, hello, ladies and gentlemen. As representative of the International Peatlands Society, I'm happy to be here. And I was just a little bit surprised 2 hours ago when I was told I was not going to or allowed to give the presentation that I prepared, but to come up here and to speak to you. So I'll do my best. And I was also told that that presentation will be online, so you can see that then later on. The International Peatlands Society has 3 commissions. These commissions are based on economy, environment, and society, the 3 pillars of sustainable development. Within these commissions, there are expert groups on agriculture, forestry, restoration, climate, culture, people, and a few others. So the International Peatlands Society covers all aspects of peatland, peatland use, and peat. Looking at the situation in the world, it has come to a stage where we're thinking differently. In the past, peat and peatlands have been used intensively. The country I come from is Germany. The first written statement about the use of peatlands is about 2,000 years old, written by Plinius the Elder, a Roman who traveled throughout Europe and wrote down everything he saw. And he wrote that the people in northern Germany and East Frisia took the mud with their hands and formed it and dried it more by the wind than through the sun, because there was not much sun up north, and warmed their food and their guts. And since then, in Germany, peatlands have been used. In 1765, Frederick the Great proclaimed an edict saying that we want to get rid of wastelands. Peatlands at that time were wastelands. And during these last 250 years, it was the goal of the government in Germany until 1981, actually, to drain peatlands for agriculture and for settlements. That means for people. As a matter of fact, it was part of the Marshall Plan after the Second World War to drain peatlands for agriculture and settlements for the 1.5 million people coming from the east who were driven out of the eastern territories of Germany. And they settled in these peatlands. So peatlands have always provided things for people. It's the case in Germany, it's the case in Canada, it's the case in Indonesia, it's worldwide. And the situation now is, you can see it in the graph that I have. It's one of the 30 slides that I have in my presentation, and this is the only one we're going to show now because of time constraints. You can see that of those 3 million square kilometers, according to Lapalainen, I heard by our moderator this morning that it's 3 to 5 million square kilometers. I don't know where these figures always come from. Figures are something that you can twist and turn sometimes the way you like. But according to Lapalainen in 1996, we have 4 million square kilometers of peatlands worldwide. And 86% of these are still undisturbed. And I assume that they will stay that way because they are in areas where people don't go to. On the other hand, we have agricultural peatlands, peatlands used for forestry, tropical peatlands, 3% for tropical peatlands. Peatlands are also used for energy in Finland, in Ireland, and in the Baltic states. But that is actually restricted to those countries. Peatlands are also used for the production of growing media. And that was actually the topic of my presentation today. Growing media are very important in Europe. Actually, the Dutch government said that that is an indispensable material for Dutch horticulture. Dutch horticulture is the second biggest industry in Holland, in the Netherlands. And it is a very important commodity, like water or like fertilizers. If you take peat away from the production of growing media, you can forget horticulture in modern times. And that is the situation in other countries as well. And that's why the Dutch government said, we need a certification system to certify that the peat that we are using comes from areas that are not natural. And that is one of the systems that exist. There's one in England and there's one in Canada. And this commodity is most important. And I wish that we in Germany or maybe the people in Holland and Europe altogether would be in the situation that you are in Congo or in Peru or in other countries where you have just discovered peatlands. Because then the stakeholders can sit together and talk about how to use or not to use peatlands. In Germany, we were not in that situation 250 years ago when Frederick the Great said, we have to get rid of these wastelands. But now, you can sit together and talk about these things, all stakeholders. And stakeholders have to be included in all discussions. And I would just like to bring forward a message, and I'm quoting something that was said in 1992 during the conference in Rio, quoting the UN. Protection of the environment is only feasible if politics consider economic and social aspects at the same time. If any pillar is weak, then the whole system of sustainable development is not sustainable. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gerard. And once again, thank you to all of our speakers. I'd now like to move to questions. I have some questions from the floor already, and we will ask questions directly. One of the questions I think we'd probably like to move to, we've heard a lot about and directly from local communities and local community involvement, farmers' involvement and smallholder involvement. Certainly here in Indonesia and interested in experiencing elsewhere around the world, the private sector is very important in the management of peatlands here in Indonesia, both in terms of using them currently and clearly it needing to be part of the solution to the management of peatlands. I guess I'd like to direct this question first to Pak Nazir, but certainly interested in experiences from elsewhere in the world. I've got one question here on that topic of the private sector, which is calling it the elephant in the room, and I think that's very much the case, and probably the element we haven't addressed yet. This question is saying, do we have to limit private sector's access to open peatlands, including requiring them to have policies that perhaps aid local communities first and apply technologies to empower local communities? Also, how do we hold the private sector accountable? I think, yes, there's a couple of other questions that relate to the private sector, but maybe we'll focus on those questions first. Pak Nazir, what is the approach towards the private sector, particularly in Indonesia's plans to restore the peatlands here?
Okay, thank you. First, we have to see that these private sector concessions on peatland, where they are located, is it in the important pit domes or not the pit domes, is shallow pit and so on. Second, what state of that peatland, meaning that what kind of crops have been planted or not. So on peatland, which is part of important pit domes, which have not been opened, that have to be protected, even by the concession holders. If they are already open but not planted, it needs to be restored. If it's in the pit domes, inside the concessions. But if that is already open and planted, then we require the companies to embark in the improved management practices of putting the water table at the least 40 centimeters below the ground, and putting equipment to measure the humidity, to measure the water table, and so on. That would require the companies to manage the water table, meaning that they have to install gates at their canals that have to close and store the water or release the water bit by bit if there's too much rainfall to keep it at 40 centimeters at the least. We hope also, we request the companies to also testing new crops that can fit better with the wet ecosystem. And we are also doing research and see if that better crops, meaning more suitable with wet ecosystems, can be planted in that area during the time of the concessions license. If the company failed to do so, and if the pit has become too dry and caught fire during the dry seasons, the government will put a very strong enforcement to the companies. So that's what the policy is being made. We are pleased to see many companies come forward and ready to do better water management, improving the water management, welcoming academics, researchers to work on that. We are also exploring on how communities can be involved in the activities. Of course, in community land, we're going to help them, but also if communities having a claims in the concessions on how that claims can be resolved, partly by involving communities doing the restoration and doing agroforestry that fit better with the peat ecosystem.
Thank you. Maybe just a related follow-up question. In terms of the government's moratorium, and in terms of some of the laws around the prevention of the use of fire, where it's not permitted, how is that going? And how is that ability to enforce some of the laws and the moratoriums that have been made, going particularly in relation to the private sector?
Monitoring is very important, either by the satellite images that we have to look and analyze, although from the field checking, often we got reports from communities, from NGOs, on what's going on the ground, about new canals being opened, important peat swamp forests are still being hacked down. We're going to check on that, of course. And if the report confirmed, then the law enforcement officials were brought in. It happened several times already in Kalimantan or in Sumatra. If you follow the news, since last year, I believe, after the fires, tens of companies have been sanctioned by the government, several levels. Some company totally revoked the license, they lost the license. Some companies were really giving up because they come and see, so for those companies who have not have huge investment, although they have already the license, they realize the the policy changes. At least I remember 2 companies gave up the license and give it back to the government because of they believe that the investment will be too difficult to be made to get the return. There are also companies which have been frozen by the government, and the government giving them a list of activities or action they need to do. If they fail to do that, they may lose the license. But if they can comply, the frozen status can be cancelled by the government. There are also companies which have been warned and watched closely by the government. So several different states on how to enforce it.
Maybe just Dennis, I know you mentioned both having palm oil development in the Amazon, but also these alternative livelihoods and alternative crops. Has there been experience in the Amazon in working with the private sector? And if you could provide us some background on that.
Yes, there were some experience with palm oil in Peru, in the Peruvian Amazon. I remember when I was a child, I was so proud to help sort palm oil, clear land, to help the tractors and do all of those things. That happens, of course, in small areas, but the government was quite responsible later, say, well, you did already over there, but not do any more in those areas where we have a lot of peatlands. So, but as I mentioned, there were local products like aguaje, which is a very important crop for local people, also for the economy of those big cities. For example, Iquitos, where I live, has about 1 million persons. The city eats about 20 tons of fruits of aguaje every day. It's a big market for that local crop. So what we are doing right now is trying to develop, inviting investors, business people to go for further, looking for new markets for that crop, for that fruit, looking for ice cream market, looking for different refreshment, like different scenes open in different places in Peru, even outside. Of course, but we are working very hard in terms of management, that piece of land. If we destroy those peatlands or that fruit, of course, we are going to be in big trouble. So the private sector is playing a role. Hopefully, they can do better job in terms of looking for new markets for that local crop, local plant. But there is something else that I want to mention. When we are looking for peatland management, in Peru we had a big mistake. We believe that the foresters, they do their job, the agronomists, they do their job, the fishermen and biologists working in fisheries, they do their job. But the point is, everybody has to work together. Peatland is a habitat that goes together, everything. And also, it's important to know about the local knowledge. People from the forest, people from the peatlands, indigenous people, they know exactly how to manage the biodiversity. Of course, science is going to help very much to understand. We invite different institutions. For example, C4 is working very hard over there to understand the issue, how the problem, how to improve it, and also some universities. So when we're talking about peatland management, it's not just a matter of forester. It's not just a matter of agronomists or biologists. We have to work all together in order to find a better way.
Thank you very much, Dennis. A question here, and I'll continue to take the questions off the pieces of paper. So if you have them, please write them down and send them up. I have a question to Ikraf and to Sonia, saying that in your perspective, from your experience, how do forestry and agroforestry industries and related technology and knowledge transfers, how have they worked in peatlands protection and in peatlands restoration? So I think the question is asking what are some of the forestry and agroforestry technologies that have been particularly effective? And that might include, as we're touching on the topic, might include either smallholder or private sector as well, please.
Thanks for the question. Actually, agroforestry has been seen as one of the options of having a sustainable peatland management by smallholders. So if the question is whether it's potential for agroforestry to be one of the management options for sustainable peatland, then the answer is yes. We have seen that the success story in some of the areas. But when the question was, the question is about agroforestry industry, whether agroforestry managed by large-scale companies, whether it's feasible, the answer is we haven't seen it yet. We don't know how that happens. Yeah, but I think the feasible solution here is partnership. So we see within the government, the current government policy, social forestry is huge. The Ministry of Environment and Forestry has set aside almost, I think it's almost 14 million hectares of areas. Part of it is peatland within forest land to be managed together with between local people and the companies as agroforestry system. So we see, for example, for the forest plantation, pulp and paper industry, then 20% of the areas of concession should be managed under the partnership in the form of agroforestry within the forest land. This is a new sort of a breakthrough. In the past, basically, forest land has to be managed as forest. Agroforestry simply doesn't exist in the policy of forestry in Indonesia. But this is now, I think, is a good news. It opens up a lot of opportunity, basically. So I think, as well, reflecting to what Pak Najib has said about several, a very stringent kind of monitoring of fire with regards to private sector, of which several private sectors has now lost their concession, and some others actually then give up and give back. I think at the interest of development in a broader sense, basically, if we see there's areas where peatland can still be managed sustainably, then I think we together need to make it workable, basically, between the government, private sector, and the smallholder, because for development, I think more or less we still need investment to be happening there. But of course, we need to do it sustainably, which area, which zones within peatland can still be managed. But also, I would like to underline here that sustainability standard of oil palm, of which then RSPO, ISPO has been there. I think there has been a lot of compliance, the demands from the end user, the demand from market for a greener product is already there. So I think all these actors basically should work together to make it sustainable business, sustainable development, sustainable livelihoods, and I think this is still workable, but I think we need to work on it together rather than finger pointing to each other. But we try to find a solution that is working, and I think agroforestry is one of those. And I'm really glad to see this morning in different contexts, like for example in Central Kalimantan compared to East Kalimantan compared to South Sumatra, what kind of agroforestry option is there, which is suitable for local context, has actually been identified, for example, by Pak Taman, by Pak Edi, by Agus, and what we so far has a bit, leave it out a little bit is fishery. Fishery is also important, so we see that sometimes the solution of sustainable livelihoods within the peatland area is not always focusing on the peatland itself, but also the surrounding area. So I think, again, partnership, communication, and look at this as a wider context of development and environment, to come up with a sustainable landscape and sustainable livelihood is important. Yeah, and agroforestry can be one of the options.
Okay, thank you, Sonia. Just a slightly different question, and I direct this to any member of the panel who might have an insight, but the international community, which is what we are part of, the Australian government and other members in the room as well, are very keen to cooperate with countries with peatlands on this issue. We note also that there are sources, clearly, of international finance. Resourcing is important if you want to conduct research, if you want to do science or restoration. There's been talk around sources of funding, particularly in the climate change space, around RED funding, so funding for the rehabilitation of forest lands, and I'm sure peatland areas can be included in that. We now have the Green Climate Fund established internationally, and there's other sources of funding as well. Often, though, it seems that the international resources have difficulty getting to the ground and making an impact. And countries, including Indonesia, sometimes the programs are not being delivered here. They might be in other countries. I'm just wondering if you have insights around what are the obstacles to that type of international assistance or international finance. Is it needed? And how can it perhaps we can remove the obstacles so that type of assistance can help with this issue here in Indonesia or in other countries? Nazir?
Yeah, thank you. Very important subject. First, of course, the massive, ambitious targets from the President, Indonesian government of peat restorations and sustainable development on the landscape level needs a lot of cooperations and resources. Particularly on peatland, the planning of the program have to be based on what we call the peatland hydrological landscape unit. It can cross 2 or 3 districts or inside one district, yeah, but it have a hydrological landscape unit. So if you do something in this part inappropriately, it will not affect only this part but the whole landscape. This is the hydrological unit. So planning on that, and then of course there is a part where government have to take it on their hand right away. Hands-on. There's a part that community will be given access and do restoration or cultivation, agroforestry, and so forth. There are parts of the land where corporations will be invited for investment or improving the existing investment and practices. All of that, I think, need to be done in a mix of government funds, of grants like GCF or other international fund or bilateral, but also with investment. I think the most challenging part is now how to blend investment and how to get more interest of the public, of the private funds from the investment to put in a one vision of this kind of landscape. Government limited resources and donor funding or multilateral funding will never be enough because of the big challenge and the big landscape we're going to work. It can be only sustainable if the business options on that area for restoration and also for economic return can be made. So we're looking forward to not only getting funding to do the work on the ground for restoration, but also how to create new economic opportunities with maybe development banks in the front, and then followed by the private financing. Thank you.
Peatland policies is very important. I guess every country has to have a very strong policy in government to preserve and make peatland restorations. But there is something very important. Peatland solution is, I would be, in my knowledge, is quite site-specific solutions. What is very important is to share those experiences because it's quite different. Even with Peru, for example, the Peruvian Amazon is quite big. There are different situations. And what we are doing is just sharing what we can do with aguaj in one place, what another plant in other place. But it's very important to share experience. That happens in Peru. But also it's very important that we can share experience within other countries. And I believe the policy is very important. We have to have very strong policies in order to have good restoration and conservation of those peatlands. But at the same time, it's important to share experience. I hope in the future, I hope over here I can invite some ice creams of cream of aguaje fruits. They are fantastic. I like it very much. I imagine over here a few people know it. But that's, in that way, we are going to help to preserve those peatlands that we have in the Amazon.
Thank you, Dennis. How much, do I have 15 more minutes?
You still have 5 more minutes.
How much more time do we have?
5 more minutes.
5 more minutes.
Yes.
Okay. Just returning to the issue of science, and we had one question here, and this may be again directed to all. I think, Patnazia, though you did mention this, but what is the largest scientific gap in the peatland restoration effort? And again, I think this is a question for all, maybe in your different theatres, your different countries and places in which you're working. But if you had maybe the top 2 scientific needs, what are they?
Yes, what we really need now at least for the case of BRG in Indonesia. I mentioned about how important to have a good map in constructing the restoration program as well as sustainable livelihood, surrounding and so on. And that is based on the type of the peatland. Is it part of the important peat dome and how deep it is, how shallow it is, and how the hydrological function in that whole area. That will enable a very good planning and program on these different land uses and then just implement. Now, to get that map is possible, but it's time consuming and it's very expensive. Satellite image is good to cover, or radar to look on the forest cover, vegetation cover, and then LiDAR, very expensive. It's great for the topography detail mapping, and then for the depth of the pit, it's still you have to go there and with the muscle to core on the land, and it's time consuming, it's very expensive, manpower intensive, and so on. So, how can we get accurate enough mapping, but less time to carry that out, and also cost less, number one. Number two, I still believe that with the NDC of every countries and the carbon emissions that can be reduced from peatland and the carbon stock, carbon sink in the peatland is one of the future commodities, the carbon credits. So also a very good science on the calculating the reduced carbon emissions from pit restorations of pit rewetting, as well as, of course, keeping the forest, the pit swamp forest, not to be converted. I dream like one day even using our smartphone, our technology. You know all this analogy. You know all that sizes of shirts different in almost every countries. So if I go to Peru, if I want to buy a shirt, I may have to recalculate what L and M and S. Can we be one day using just a smartphone? The shopkeeper scan you and right away know, oh, okay, because of this size, you fit in this size in our store. So that can also one day that we can have aerial photograph or satellite looking at how wet the pit and how dry the pit is, and it's converted into like how much carbon is stored, how much carbon is reduced, and so on. So the technology in estimating quick and accurate enough. I think these two things of the mapping and then the estimations of the carbon stock and reduction will be great contribution.
Thank you, Pat. Gerald.
Sometimes I have difficulties with terminology. When you talk about restoration over here, it seems not to be the same as the restoration that we are looking at in other places. The government over here in Indonesia would like to, or that's the goal that you have, to restore 2.4 million hectares by 2020. That's another 3 years. In Germany, we've been doing that, in particular in the federal state of Lower Saxony, where I come from, and where most of the peat extraction is, and most of the raised bogs, those are different peatlands than you have here. We have managed to re-wet 15,000 hectares in 36 years, which is, for us, it's a lot actually, but in your perspective, that's minimal, that's nothing. And I think what you are looking at is not restoration right now, is re-wetting. And that's why hydro management is the most important thing when you talk about this upper goal of restoration. Restoration means actually bringing the whole peatland back to the natural state that it once was in. That's restoration. And if you say that you want to re-wet 40 centimeters under the surface, that is not actually restoration, that's re-wetting. And you will still have subsidence because of the microbiological decomposition of the peat in the top layer. You have air, you automatically have microbes, and you have oxidation and degradation of the organic matter that you have there. So looking at restoration, you have to bring the water level way up to the top, maybe just a few centimeters below the surface, and then you can possibly restore. But it takes a long time to restore a peatland.
Yes, I agree with all we are talking about. Really, in science, we need methodologies to know exactly how much peatland we have. One thing is flooded forests, another thing is peatlands. That's very important. I guess science can go further, and maybe later we can exactly manage how much peatland we have. At the same time, I agree exactly in terms of restoration. A peatland is not formed in 10 years, 100 years. It was formed in 1,000 years. So the restoration is going to be quite different. What I want to mention is something in terms of policies. If we want really to manage peatlands, we have to have good policies. We have to work in terms of land tenure. If we don't work in land tenure, I don't mean the titling, I mean land tenure. I guess a person, whoever it is a farmer, it is a local people, indigenous people, they are going to preserve it. It's important not to see it as a wasteland. It's important to see it as a resources, natural resources where you can find different things. You can find fishery, you can find fruits, you can find different other plants, you can find forests. But it's important to work in terms of land tenures in order to preserve, to conserve those peatlands. Otherwise, it's going to be difficult because if the land doesn't have owner, nobody's going to take care of it.
Thank you, Dennis. Now, I'm not sure if I have time for one final question.
I'm sorry, the time is up. It's time to hear your closing remarks.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. I know Pat Nasir in particular, there were many questions from the floor there, but you might have an opportunity over lunch to talk further about some of the details of the new peat regulations, and I think there's questions around that as well. Again, I won't try and wrap up such an extensive conversation, except to pull out a couple of key points. And clearly, there is a strong interest to share information around peatland science, peatland management, restoration, and that's an important task that needs to be done within countries and between countries. Given the numbers of stakeholders, it's clearly not an easy task, but a very important one. Not just looking at local communities, but also looking at the role of the private sector and how they are engaged. Looking at issues such as, I think Dennis emphasised, markets for some of the alternative livelihoods or some of the practices that can occur on the peatlands. And as Pat Nazir mentioned, when we're talking about financing and resources, looking at making those sustainable, again, accessing finance and funding from the private sector. And clearly there's a very strong interest, once again, in the science and technology and sharing experiences in those areas. So we hope that today you've received at least a brief insight into some of the issues of engaging on peatlands around the world and here in Indonesia. And once again, can you join me in thanking all of our very esteemed panellists for their contributions? Thank you.